Hey, welcome to SI Now. It is Wednesday, February 8th, and I'm Maggie Gray, alongside former WWE superstar and commentator of Mark Burnett's Lucha Underground, the smoldering Matt Stryker. But we should start with something that's a little bit more serious because things could not get worse for Baylor football. After learning even more last week about how former coach Art Briles and his assistants actively covered up alleged criminal behavior of certain Baylor football players, now we've learned the new coach, Matt Rhule's brief tenure, has been spoiled as well. Brandon Washington, a strength and conditioning coach hired by Rhule, was arrested as part of a prostitution sting over the weekend. Lindsay Schnell has been covering Baylor's indiscretions for nearly 2 years, and she joins us now. All right, Lindsay, we just learned that the Big 12 may be handing down monetary sanctions against Baylor. Do you believe that will be the only punishment handed down to the football program, or is there more to come?
Well, first of all, Maggie, when you said it can't get worse for Baylor, I think we each keep thinking that. You know, we thought that last week when all this new stuff came out in response to a lawsuit, and that was information about how Briles covered stuff up. And then this thing happened. So I think things can continue to get worse for Baylor.
Wow.
Yes, the Big 12 has announced that they are going to withhold 25% of the revenue share from Baylor. I read this morning that that's going to be around $7 million, and they're going to do that until they have, confirmation and clarity that Baylor is complying with everything, including Title IX. So we're not sure how long that will be. Is that going to be the only punishment? That's a good question. The NCAA is supposedly now investigating Baylor again after a different lawsuit that came out a couple weeks ago that alleges over 50 rapes by over 30 players. I think it's 52 rapes by 31 players that were covered up over a period of time. And then NCAA is looking into if that's true, if players were receiving any sort of special treatment or benefits. So I don't think that this case is over yet, far from it.
What about canceling the season? I mean, people are talking about the death penalty. Lindsay, do you see this punishment going on the field?
Well, the people talking about the death penalty, I haven't heard that out of anyone who works at the NCAA's mouth. I've heard that from fans. So I don't think that those are legitimate things that are going to happen anytime soon. I also think that there are a lot of kids at Baylor who play on the football team who had nothing to do with this. And before this prostitution thing over the weekend, Matt Rhule had come in and had, kind of a golden boy image. So I don't think the season's going to be canceled. It is a long time till then. Maybe there will be some clarity come August in fall camp in terms of if this is totally cleaned up. But to me, the bigger thing is just until Briles apologizes and maybe is specific about what he did that was wrong, what he covered up, his role in the entire thing, more lawsuits are going to come out, I believe, and then more details are going to trickle out.
Lindsay, Matt Stryker here. A lot of people feel that this goes deeper than football. They feel that it's systemic, and the revenue being withheld, this emphasizes the fact that there's an importance on winning and money in society over ethics. But do you agree that the NCAA should have a responsibility with the message that it sends to our young men and women about the importance of accountability?
Oh, yeah, I think that every coach talks about that when they sign a kid, right? We just had college football's holiday last week, 2 weeks ago, National Signing Day, and coaches talk about teaching kids how to be young men. Women's basketball coaches talk about teaching them how to be young women. So, yeah, accountability is important, but that also extends to the NCAA needs to stay in its lane. We saw what happened at Penn State. They levied them with these huge sanctions, and then they took them back because that wasn't what they hadn't violated NCAA rules, and that's the important thing. I'm continuing to be curious about how much money Baylor is ultimately going to wind up paying out to victims, how many more victims come forward. And you're right that we do value winning above all else. I strongly believe that if Aaron Hernandez were not in prison and an NFL team thought he could help them win, that they would suit him up. But when people start to feel it on the bottom line, that seems to be when it makes a difference.
It's interesting because I agree, and I think the Title IX investigations, as you said, Lindsay, is going to be something to keep an eye on because I think that's where Baylor might get hit the hardest. Can we talk about the coaches, though? You mentioned Art Briles. He was fired from Baylor in May, but Lindsay, he clearly has designs on coaching again. He was a consultant for the Browns earlier this season. I mean, can he possibly get another college job?
I don't know that he can get another college job with the information that came out last week, but like you guys said, people will do a lot of things to win. I could see him in the NFL. I'm curious to see how much his son, Kendall Briles, was hired as offensive coordinator at Florida Atlantic under new coach Lane Kiffin. How much is Art around? I think that when you hire Kendall, you know his dad is a big influence in his life on and off the field. And how much do you see his dad around? Do you hire Kendall because you want some of Art's insights? There's no denying that Art is a good football coach, X's and O's wise. And I think that some people care about that more than anything else.
Lindsay Schnell, you've been doing a fantastic job of covering all the twists and turns with this Baylor story. Keep up the great work. I've been recommending everything you're writing to everyone who I come across because it's been fantastic. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mag.
Appreciate it. I mean,
This is terrible.
It is terrible. I mean, we're going to move on to another topic in just a moment. But, I mean, Lindsay says no death penalty, no season being canceled. But what do you think?
I disagree. I think the minute that Baylor football steps on the field, it ultimately gives a black eye to the NCAA. And saying the NCAA should stay in their lane, I mean, this goes beyond everything. We talk about the election cycle. We talk about politics. There are little kids watching. And for them to be told that this is okay, for young athletes to think that they are above the law, that right there is the problem. You send your kids to college so that they can learn accountability, morals, ethics, and how to prepare to be an adult. And I think the NCAA, Baylor University, and all the other universities that participate in things like this are really doing a disservice to society.
I just wish that the NCAA would get involved in this one way. For people and for the kids who have done nothing wrong, allow them to leave the school and transfer without a penalty. I mean, as Lindsay alluded to it, I mean, there are so many players on the football team and people associated with Baylor that actually are doing good things. So let them have the ability to transfer without any kind of penalty. And as for the Kendall Briles and the other assistant coaches who are failing up and getting jobs at other Division I schools, these guys have to get, I mean, you have to have the NCAA come down on them. Show cause penalties. These guys should not be out there recruiting. I'm not in favor of these coaches getting to do what they love at the expense of all these people who are hurt.
Playing sports is a privilege. And
coaching sports is a privilege.
And I do believe that they have now removed their right to have that privilege.
All right, we should move on to our next topic.
All right, well, it is about coaches.
Coaching.
Yes.
And former college coaches.
The Atlanta Falcons have announced that former Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian is their new offensive coordinator. He replaces outgoing offensive coordinator and new San Francisco 49er head coach Kyle Shanahan. This is compounded by a much larger shakeup that includes Falcons staff members Richard Smith, Brian Cox, amongst others. Maggie, let's start with the addition of Sark.
Okay.
Does this make the Falcons a better football team?
I don't think so. I'm not convinced that it does. Sarkisian has very limited NFL experience. It's basically one season with the Oakland Raiders back in 2004 when he was a quarterbacks coach. The quarterback that year was Kerry Collins, and he threw 20 interceptions, which I'm not saying is Sark's fault, but I mean, that doesn't really bode well. Listen, Sarkisian called a heck of a game in the national championship. You know, Alabama, they were close there at the end, and Clemson ended up winning it. I don't think that works against him, but there's a lot of things that I dislike about Nick Saban. Let's be honest, his thoughts on the media is one of them, and some of his other, things with demeanor and such. But you can't deny that the guy is a winner. And if anyone can help him win, he will keep them at all costs. He and Steve Sarkisian, he said goodbye to him after the guy was his offensive coordinator for one game, and it was a loss in the national championship game. So I'm not so sure that Sark is trending up right now, but we'll see what he gets done with Atlanta. It's going to be big shoes to fill with Kyle Shanahan.
Now, something I found interesting, Coach Quinn said, and I quote, that he finds Sark's aggressive play calling to be something that he enjoys, and he knows that Sark has familiarity with the schemes. It just feels like all the blame is going to one person for the Falcons' faults, which was Kyle Shanahan. But let's look at how come Dan Quinn isn't being blamed? How come Matt Ryan isn't being blamed? And why are most of the changes coming on the defensive side of the football?
Yeah, I'm a little curious about that too. I mean, the defense got to Brady. They sacked him 5 times. They had a pick 6. I mean, I thought they showed up pretty well in this game. And then in the second half, the Patriots adjusted and they came back and won. I mean, I think that if you ask them, Dan Quinn, I'm sure, is feeling pretty awful right now, and I'm sure that Matt Ryan is feeling the same way. We know that Quinn and Sarkisian, they have a connection, a Pete Carroll connection, where Dan Quinn coached under him in Seattle. Sark was under him at USC. They were both in Seattle at the same time when Sark was at the University of Washington and Dan Quinn was in Seattle. So maybe they feel like they know each other, and maybe they feel like they're simpatico here, but I'm just not sure that this is going to equal the Falcons getting back to the Super Bowl, which should be the goal.
One thing to point out is that Matt Ryan loves the hurry up and the no huddle, and Sark definitely utilizes the hurry up very well. So I once read in a book, ask and it will be given, knock and the door shall be open. So opportunity comes and Sark's taking it.
A book, the good book.
The book. Yes.
All right, we'll have to see what happens with Steve Sarkisian and Atlanta. In the meantime, the Super Bowl is in the rearview mirror, we think. So we're going to turn our attention to the NFL Scouting Combine and the upcoming draft. Last week in Houston, I caught up with reigning national champion and thorn in the side of Alabama, Deshaun Watson, to discuss his football future. Reigning national champion Deshaun Watson joining us on behalf of Papa John, and we will get to that in just a moment. But what was the most surprising message or well-wish that you received after winning the title? Because I imagine you were flooded with congratulations.
It was many, but just from the Alabama fans congratulating us, and just how fun it was just to have that game and experience it, and how well respected we were as opponents and playing against each other.
That's really interesting, and critics out there, they're going to look to the accuracy, they're going to look to some of the interceptions. I mean, is that something you feel like you need to defend yourself against? Do you feel like you need to explain yourself there?
I'm going to have to explain myself, of course, but I take full responsibility for all that stuff. And, the interceptions come and go. Just for instance, James Winston had the same thing, and he had the opportunity to win a national championship. And, sometimes it just don't go your way. And, the accuracy, I kind of laugh at that because, I threw for 4,500 yards and over 40 touchdowns and won a national championship, and I think, and they still want to consider the accuracy is wrong. So you got to be accurate to be able to do that.
Your coach Dabo Swinney said passing on you would be like passing on Michael Jordan. How did you respond when that got back to you?
It caught me off guard, but that's the type of person he is. He's very confident in his players, very confident in me, and I feel like I can have a lot of success. And he's just one of the guys that he instead of putting the pressure on me, he put the pressure on the teams. So,
did any thoughts of potentially flying under the radar go completely out the window? I don't know if you can fly under the radar.
I always, kind of going into this process, I knew I was going to be one of the guys that a lot of people talk about. And Michael Jordan is up here; he's the greatest of all time. But I have to work my way up there. So it's just a little thing that hey, maybe in the future I can be the name that Michael Jordan is. So
maybe it's a goal, maybe it's something to aspire to, right? Why not? You got to set the bar high. I know you had a conversation with the Browns before the Senior Bowl. What was your biggest takeaway from that combo?
It was just great, just trying to get to know each other. Talk to Hugh Jackson a little bit, and just try to get on the same page and how I'm feeling and things like that, and how the season went.
Do you feel like you deserve to be the #1 quarterback drafted?
I think so. I feel like every other quarterback should feel that same way too. But personally for myself, I feel like I've done a lot, and feel like I can bring a lot to a team and to the table and perform highly on a football field. But we'll see what happens. Regardless of where I go and what pick I go, a team's going to get a guy that's going to come compete and win some games.
Were the Browns the only team you've spoken to, or have other teams reached out?
I've talked to other teams before, and it's been a couple other teams.
Can you tell us who it was?
San Fran, Chiefs, Chicago, Arizona. It's been a couple, and it's going to be more, but a lot has been going on. So
it's exciting. You have something going on with Papa John's as well.
Right. But yeah, I'm here on behalf of Papa John's this week for the Super Bowl, and just hanging out with John and Archie and all those great guys, Archie Manning, and all those great guys, just to be able to spend time with them, and it just feels like a family. And I encourage everyone to go to PapaJohnsPizzaFamily.com and just really check it out.
That's great. Deshaun Watson, we wish you all the best of luck in this long draft process. Hopefully it's not too much of a grind for you.
It's all fun, so.
I was impressed. Met the kid. That was the first time that he and I had ever spoken. We're hearing now that maybe the New York Jets are another team that's interested at 6. We're going to hear every team that needs a quarterback be interested in Deshaun Watson. Should he be a first-round pick, though?
There's a lot of people that say that some of his mechanics don't necessarily translate to the pro level. But when you said the Jets, I can just feel a bunch of my friends back home in Bayside, Queens. I'm just screaming because.
How about our entire crew?
Because you can imagine
you have to go that far.
What a superstar like Watson that people think he might become could do for that franchise. But something that was really interesting is he mentioned the 49ers. And I got to give love to my NorCal people out there. I think that that would be a very interesting fit as well. What says you?
I mean, listen, the 49ers are not a piece away. They're many pieces away. So if you're going to go finding a quarterback in the draft, I think it's a really smart thing to do. And I think Watson, I like him better in a warm weather city than a cold weather city, quite frankly. And I think the mechanics are something that's going to be interesting. We all know what's going to happen. One team is going to fall in love with Deshaun Watson or Deshaun Kaiser or Mitch Trubisky or one of these guys, and they're going to shoot up to the top of the draft and probably get taken higher than they should be taken. If Phil Jackson and Carmelo Anthony were in a Facebook relationship, the status would read, it's complicated, and maybe more like toxic. Jackson praised a Bleacher Report article that argued his star player and #1 trade asset, Carmelo Anthony, isn't committed to winning, claiming a leopard doesn't change its spots, and Melo will never change. Phil Jackson hasn't changed, using the media to get messages across to his players. It has worked at times, maybe Kobe and Shaq, but doesn't look like it's working with Melo. Let's welcome an NBA reporter for TNT and NBA.com, David Aldridge. David, what is Phil Jackson accomplishing by sending a tweet like the one about Carmelo Anthony?
If you know what it is that he's accomplishing, I wish you'd tell me. I don't see a whole lot of positives coming out of that exchange. Phil is just kind of, set in his ways. He does things, as you mentioned, through the media to try and get messages to players. But it just isn't working. This is just a different guy than Michael or Carmelo or Kobe or Shaq. Those guys, I think we're on a different kind of wavelength than Carmelo is. I don't think Carmelo is a bad person or a bad player. I don't think he doesn't want to win. I just don't know that he has the skill sets that some of the other guys mentioned had that can lead to winning. So to constantly denigrate him, I don't think really achieves any purpose. But, Phil's kind of old school, and this is how he operates.
David, Matt Stryker here. In the tweet, Phil Jackson alluded to not being able to reach or change Michael Graham during his time in the CBA. Is this Phil Jackson's ego, or is it Phil Jackson's passion to win?
Oh, it's probably a little of both. I think Phil genuinely believes this is the best way to get to people. I don't know that Phil has ever had a strong, real personal relationship with many of his players. It's just not how he's ever been wired. I mean, even when he was in Cleveland, in Chicago, his relationships with Jordan they were fine, but they didn't go out to dinner together or anything like that. They didn't spend a whole lot of time off the floor together. And so Phil has never been one to really be close to any of his players. He's got maybe Judd Bushler, a couple other guys, but for the most part, he keeps an arm's distance. I think he feels like that's the proper relationship between a coach and a player. And his success, I'm sure, feeds the ego part that you mentioned, and it should. He's got 11 championships. I know why he believes this is the right way, because he's had success doing it at the highest level this way. I just don't know that this time, and especially not being on the bench coaching, I don't know how Phil's message really resonates with anybody right now.
Yeah, I think it's totally different with him as GM as opposed to him as coach. And I think, David, a lot of people see this as sort of a black or white issue. Either Carmelo's going to get traded or Phil is going to get fired. This is going to end one of two ways. Ultimately, how do you see this getting resolved? What happens?
Well, look, it's hard to predict the future. I guess I would say the preponderance of the evidence to me would lead to Phil not being there at some point in the next couple of years, because I really believe Carmelo does not want to leave New York. I think he likes New York. I think his family likes New York, and I think that combination is going to make it very difficult for him to go anywhere else. Even if he would want to play with LeBron in Cleveland, and I'm sure that he would love to play with LeBron. I don't know that from a family standpoint is what his people are going to want. And the Clippers, while good, I don't think right now, even with Carmelo, could beat the Warriors. So that's why I think if one of them is going, I could see Phil, at the end of his contract saying, look, I got you, Porzingis. You've got a lottery pick this year in the draft. Your team is well on the way to rebuilding. I'm going to let the next guy finish it.
All right. David Aldridge, thanks for joining us. We could hear you from the airport putting in work, David. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks a
Travel
lot.
safe.
Okay, David Aldridge believes that Phil is going to be the first one out the door and that Carmelo stays. What do you think?
Well, I think there's more upside to keeping Phil Jackson than there is to keeping Carmelo Anthony, as much as Knicks fans may disagree with me. I just feel that given another season or two, you'd rather have Phil Jackson because he can make that one move that can turn this franchise around to what it was when I was a kid growing up. It's a shell of its former self, the New York Knicks. They used to be a very strong defensive basketball team. Now it's almost comical for the amount of money they charge for fans to come to the Garden and watch this team play. So I think you're better off keeping Phil Jackson and shipping Melo.
See, I agree with DA. I think that the one move that Phil Jackson made to try to save the franchise already happened. It was Porzingis. He got him with the 4th overall pick, sort of fell into his lap, but to his credit, he took a chance on an unknown kid who was playing in Europe. That's it to me. That's his legacy, if there's any, as a general manager. Everything else has been absolutely poor. Coaching hirings and firings have been messy. Player contracts have been awful. Why is Joakim Noah signed for more years to this team? And that's just one. I could bring out 5 more. And then when it comes to leadership, I mean, you're going to take aim at Carmelo Anthony. You're going to compare him to a CBA washout when this guy is a future Hall of Famer and has built up a lot of equity with a lot of the fan base. You're going to take aim at Melo. Meanwhile, Derrick Rose, who just came to the team this year, goes completely AWOL for 48 hours, and we don't hear a peep from the general manager.
That has a totally different circumstance, I think. And also, to your point, that may not, Phil didn't have any powder in that, so to speak. He didn't really have any reason to chime in there. But
on Derrick Rose going completely AWOL?
There had to have been a reason that he respected there. And I know that's not a term that we use with Phil Jackson quite a bit, but to me, this is like the Kardashians. You can't turn away even though you want to. And if they ever had Kylie Jenner taking a charge on the floor at the Garden, I would be front row right there.
You know what? I almost think they're way more entertaining than the Kardashians, because we could eventually see a superstar like Carmelo Anthony, a scorer like Carmelo Anthony, change teams and potentially be a factor in a playoff run. That'd be cool.
Imagine he comes back to the Garden and drops 50 against the Knicks. Well, the theme for today seems to be leadership. And with that said, the Boston Bruins, one of the oldest, most revered franchises in all of sports, 6 Stanley Cups, over 40 Hall of Famers,
wow,
and the NHL scoring title is named for the team's head coach and general manager for over 30 years, Art Ross. With that said, yesterday, after 10 seasons, the Bruins' winningest coach, yes, you heard that right, winningest coach, Claude Julien, has been dismissed. With the climate of winning in the New England area being as such, the Patriots, the Red Sox, the resurgence of the Celtics,
sure, there's
even more pressure on the Jacobs family and the organization to win. So, is this a wise move for the Bruins to depart with Claude Julien?
I like your pronunciation there. You're so sophisticated. I guess so, probably.
Best.
I've always said this about coaches. They're your cheapest mistake, even a legend like Claude Julien. And if the message is not getting through, if it's gotten stale, then it's time for him to go. Now, my question really isn't so much about the coach. It's really about how the team is constructed. They have 5 players who take up 50% of the salary cap. I mean, what was the expectation for the Bruins this year? Was it Stanley Cup? I thought it's wild card, which is basically where they're at.
I think with the legacy of the franchise, it always has to be Stanley Cup. And look, the Bruins are not a bad hockey club. If you look at the standings, they're a point or two out of a playoff spot. And the league it's getting younger. So change is inevitable, and sometimes it's good. And we may be talking about Claude Julien in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I know. The league's getting younger, yet if you're starting a new franchise, you
Yes, you
probably
go with
want a
Claude Julien.
seasoned veteran like Claude Julien to run it. Now, this is the fourth NHL coach that we've seen fired so far this season. Yeah. This is a tough job. But it's obviously not the only coaching firings that we've seen. And throughout history, there are several that just are worth revisiting, Matt, because at a time like this, we wonder whether it's going to have a positive effect or whether it's going to have a negative effect. Now, for me, one of the most intriguing mid-season coaching firings and then hirings was Stan Van Gundy of the Miami Heat, and then Pat Riley takes over. You can see it right there. That was a season, the 2005-2006 Miami Heat season, where a year ago the team had gone to the Eastern Conference Finals and lost in 7 games to the Detroit Pistons, the second iteration of the bad boy Pistons. Then they feel like they have the pieces. They have Shaquille O'Neal. Gary Payton was on that team. Alonzo Mourning back from all of his kidney issues. And Dwayne Wade playing at the peak, really, of what we've seen. And Stan Van Gundy gets fired 21 games into the season. Now, I thought that Pat Riley, I think he wanted another ring. I'm going to be honest with you. I think he wanted another ring. He saw that he was going to be able to pick off another one. And he and Van Gundy, I think they just started butting heads, and finally he shoved Van Gundy out the door. Now, what's interesting is they actually could have probably won another ring, but the next year, Dwayne Wade had that famous shoulder injury where he got wheeled off the court. If that hadn't happened in February of the next year, they may have won 2 in a row.
Well, I will see yours and raise you the Buck Showalter, Joe Torre controversy. It came after the strike season, and George Steinbrenner wanted Buck Showalter to fire his hitting coach, Rick Down. And to Buck's credit, Buck said no. So depending on who you believe, Buck either resigned or was fired. Joe Torre comes in, and a lot of people give credit to Buck Showalter and Stick Michael for building the team that went on to win 5 World Series championships. But for me, being a New Yorker, that Buck was beloved. Joe became beloved. So it really is just one of those things that really stuck out in my mind as a kind of thing.
It's not the only famous Yankee firing, though, when you have George Steinbrenner leading the organization for as long as he did.
Absolutely. And are there any that were not on the list of coaching changes that?
No, I think I teed you up for your Yankees one. Billy Martin.
To be polite,
I mean,
yes.
No, I think that, you know, the trials and tribulations that came between Billy Martin and George Steinbrenner are just legendary. I mean, one of my favorite sports books of all time is Ladies and Gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning. It's a fantastic book that really just, talks about their relationship.
Yeah, Steinbrenner fires Billy Martin, hires Bob Lemon because the Yankees are 14 games behind the rival Red Sox. With Lemon at the helm, they go on to force a 1-game tiebreaker against the Red Sox, and a home run that is perhaps the most famous home run in Yankee modern history. Bucky Dent, who a lot of people don't know, is he was hitting in the 9-hole that game. Bucky Dent had a 12-year career. He only hit 40 home runs, and that one right there was huge. And
40 for the career.
Yes, for his career, not in the season. 40 for a career, and it's everything. But Red Sox fans now have a new nickname for Bucky Dent. It's Bucky effing Dent.
Yeah. They have a couple, Aaron Bleeping Boone. Involves an F bleeping to everything,
Yes.
Roger Bleeping.
Maggie Bleeping Gray.
I've been known to be called worse. Matt Stryker, great seeing you. Thanks so much, and fantastic job this week.
I appreciate it.
Hope to see you again soon. Yes. All right, that's going to do it for this Wednesday edition of SI Now. I want to thank Matt for joining me the last few days. Give it up, guys in the studio. Can we give it up for Matt Stryker? I feel like we should just roll the highlights again. I'll be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We're going to hear from former Heisman winner and MLB hopeful Tim Tebow, and also NL MVP and World Series champion Chris Bryant. Until then, stick with SI.com for all the latest news, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at SI Now Live. We promise no tweets about Carmelo Anthony. Maybe. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow.